Get ready, because today we're going to talk about 7 strategies for writing and finishing a story. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Story Made Simple, which covers the 8 key elements of storytelling. And if you want to learn more or pick up your copy today, you can check the link in the description below. One of the most frequent questions I get on this channel, and this comes from writers of all different skill levels, it's the question of how do you take a story from start to finish? And this is an important topic to me personally because when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to write a novel, but I was totally lost. I didn't know what to do, I didn't know where to take it, and I was looking for answers. Eventually, I read Stephen King's book On Writing, which is considered one of the greatest writing guides out there, but for me, it just absolutely did not help. In fact, it steered me in the completely wrong direction because Stephen King's strategy for writing a novel just didn't work for me. It's nothing against him, but it's just the fact that the way he described writing a novel was kind of like feeling your way through the dark. Like you come up with an idea and then you just kind of feel your way through the dark until you get to the very end of the story. And that obviously has worked really well for him, and I know a lot of other writers who it's worked well for, but for me personally, it just didn't work at all. And I spent years trying to write a novel and just failing again and again and just falling apart in the middle of the story until I explored some other strategies. And that's why today I want to take a look at 7 different strategies for writing a large-scale story. We'll start by looking at strategies that require little to no preparation, like that Stephen King method, and as we get closer toward the end of the video, we'll focus more on strategies that require planning. And what I'll do for each one, I'll explain how it works, and I'll also give you the pros and cons of using it. That way you can decide which one might be best for you or what kind of setbacks you might encounter along the way. But one thing to keep in mind here is that there is no correct strategy. There's no perfect strategy. You just got to find the one that works best for you. First strategy is wandering through the dark. This is that Stephen King method we just talked about. Basically, you come up with an idea, you start writing, and you follow that idea all the way to the end of the story. It's very simple, very straightforward. It requires no planning at all, although throughout the writing process, you might generate ideas or you might envision different outcomes happening in the next couple chapters, things like that. But for the most part, you're just kind of essentially wandering through a dark cave, trying to feel your way to the end of it. And this can have some great benefits, especially the fact that it's organic, it can be fun, it can lead to some surprises, things that you didn't even expect when you started writing. So if you're surprising yourself, chances are you're going to surprise your audience as well. As for the downsides, you might write a story that goes nowhere, or you might write yourself into a corner, or you might just, fizzle out midway through because you just don't know where to take it. And of course, that's the high risk, high reward kind of thing going on here. If you are going to use this method, yes, it can lead to some fun surprises, but at the same time, it can also lead you to the middle of nowhere and you can end up wasting a lot of time. Second strategy is what I call destination without a map. And this is very similar to the first strategy, but there's a key difference, and it's that you have a clear ending in mind, a specific ending that you're shooting for. Now, you don't have to marry yourself to this ending. You can always change it later, but instead of just starting with an idea and feeling your way through the dark until you reach an ending, you have a clear one in mind that you're aiming for over the course of the story. The great thing about this is that it gives you a clear sense of the story's overall direction while still allowing you tons of flexibility. It's kind of like if you decided that you wanted to take a road trip from New York to Los Angeles. You know your destination, you know you want to go to Los Angeles, but you don't know what stops you're going to make along the way. You don't know what hotels you're going to stay at, what big cities you're going to hit, what tourist attractions you're going to look at. You don't know all those things, so there's plenty of flexibility, plenty of things that can happen, but you know that you have to keep going west. You're not going to just swerve up into Canada or down into Mexico. You're going to always focus on getting toward LA. As for the downsides of this method, even though you do know your ending, you know your final destination, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to have an easy time with the middle of the story. You're still going to have to figure that out. You may run into some trouble there. You may not know exactly how to get through the middle of the story, how to get all the way to Los Angeles. You may find that your story peters out after 50 pages, 100 pages, whatever it is. The other thing is that your ending may feel like it's restricting you at times, especially toward the end of the story. You might have some fun developments going on, and then in the back of your head, you're saying to yourself, oh no, I got to get to Los Angeles. How do I get the characters there? And then that can cause you to force some different story events in order to make it happen. Strategy number 3 is what I call the beginning, end, middle method, or you might even think of it as the 1-3-2 method. The way this works is that you write the first quarter of your story, you dig in, you do the actual drafting, then you jump all the way to the final quarter of your story, the final confrontation between hero and villain, the big battle at the end, whatever you want to think of it as. You write that whole thing out as well, and then you worry about the middle. Now, this might sound a little crazy, and I've certainly lost some brain cells through the years, but the basic theory here is that you want to establish your characters, establish your story world, get the main plot in motion, then figure out how everything is going to pay off in the end. How is the main plot going to, pay off in terms of the hero versus the villain, the final confrontation, what kind of events need to take place at the end. And then once you've solidified this, then you worry about the middle. Then you worry about bridging the beginning to the end. And this can be great because if you figure out the final chunk of your story, you figure out all the things that have to happen, all the things that need to pay off at the end, oftentimes that brings the middle of your story into focus. If, for instance, you have a scenario where maybe you have a group of heroes battling against like a sorceress at the end, and they overcome the sorceress because they have these special magical abilities or something like that. Then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, in the middle of the story, they have to learn those magical abilities. They have to have trial and error. They have to make mistakes and learn how to use them properly in order to take down this sorceress. As for the downsides, if you do write that final chunk of your story before you attack the middle, oftentimes that final chunk will feel undercooked, underdeveloped, or cliched because essentially you're just taking these basic characters that you started with and you're just dropping them into this final battle scenario and you're just letting them rip. Strategy number 4 is what is called writing the islands. And this comes from Matt Bell's book, Refuse to be Done. I talked about this on the channel about a month ago. The basic idea of writing the islands is that you want to write the key scenes from your story. Like write the scenes that are the big ones, the money makers, the ones that the audience will talk about afterwards. And you want to write these because they excite you, they energize you, and they give you an idea of how the story will play out. And keep in mind, you can write them in any order you want. If you have a particular scene in mind that's going to happen midway through the story and you're really passionate about it, just write it now. It'll start opening doors for you. You'll figure things out like, oh, I need to set this up, or it needs to pay off in a certain way. It'll help you map out the rest of the story. It's a great strategy. Now, as for the downsides, you will eventually have to connect all these scenes together, and once you've had all your fun writing the big scenes, then all of a sudden you have to worry about the connecting tissue. That can be a real bummer. It can also be frustrating if you're struggling to connect these scenes together, because just because you write something that excites you and something that's really cool doesn't mean that it's going to factor into the story in a workable way. Strategy number 5 is what I call the skeleton plot. And this means coming up with a bare bones string of events that can guide your story from start to finish. So if we go back to our roadmap metaphor where we're starting in New York and we want to get to Los Angeles, if we're working with a skeleton plot, we might also include some stops in Philadelphia or Chicago or St. Louis. Like we would have these things in mind as stops along the way that'll get us from start to finish. Essentially, you're figuring out the key events, the key plot points that'll get your story where it needs to go. And this can be great because not only does it give you a bird's eye view of your story, not only does it give it direction, but it also allows flexibility. As for the downsides, a bare bones plot, it might feel too restrictive for some people while also feeling a little too cookie cutter for others, especially if you're somebody who wants a little more planning going on, if you want more details into those events, those stops along the way. This might not feel like enough for you. So it's ultimately going to come down to how much structure do you feel like you need. If you only want like loose structure, you want like maximum flexibility aside from like the key events, then this is probably going to work for you. But if you want more structure, or even if you're feeling like maybe too restricted by this one, it's probably not going to work for you. And that brings us to number 6, which I call flesh and bone structure. So essentially what we're going to do, we're going to take that skeleton plot, that bare bones plot, and we're going to flesh it out more. Instead of just having a string of shallow, basic plot events, we're going to explore them a little deeper. We're going to explore how character arcs factor into them. In my book, Story Made Simple, I talk about this idea called the 10 targets. Basically, I have these 10 specific plot points that you want to hit in your story. And not only do you want to hit them from a plot perspective, but you also want to hit them from a character arc perspective as well. So for instance, most stories contain an inciting incident, which is a moment about 10% into a story where something happens that shakes up the main character's world and forces them to consider going on a journey. Now, that event itself, that plot event is important, but it should also factor into the character's arc. And when we're talking about the character's arc, we're talking about how they're overcoming a flaw or a lie over the course of the story. So at this point in the story, they're usually going to be embedded in a lie, like they believe a lie about themselves, that I'm not good enough or something like that. And this inciting incident is going to be the first challenge to that lie. And so instead of just having a moment, like a plot moment that just pushes the story forward, you're also going to want to push the character arc forward as well. As for the downsides to this method, while it's great to plan things out in detail and and have a good idea where the story is going and where the big steps are going to happen along the way. Sometimes when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of the drafting process and you start writing and you start taking these characters from moment to moment throughout the story, sometimes you realize that they're not headed in the direction you planned. So a lot of that planning can go to waste, especially if characters' motivations aren't syncing up like the way you'd hoped. And finally, strategy number 7 is the detailed outline. This requires the greatest amount of preparation, and it involves things like figuring out the overall story, the overall structure, also the mid-range developments, the individual scenes, maybe even the beats within your scenes. This is great if you like to brainstorm and plan and figure out all the details before you actually sit down to write the story. As for the downsides, this is very time-consuming, it requires tons of planning, and just because you have this detailed outline in place doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a great story. Sometimes you'll start writing and you'll figure out that, oh wow, these characters are not who I thought they were. This is not the way that I thought the story would play out. And I spent all this time writing all these different scene beats that are just not working in practice. The other problem here is that it may lead to events that feel forced, or it may suffocate your creativity, especially if you're drafting the story and you feel obligated to go along with your outline instead of exploring different opportunities. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what method has worked best for you? Or which method do you hope to try in the future? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel and learn more about the craft of writing, check out my book, Story Made Simple. It covers the 8 key elements of storytelling, and it does so in no-nonsense fashion. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember to keep on writing.